Were you compensated for that property that you gave the municipality?
Not at all. Not at all. So the property was given to the municipality, and all of the rights and everything in it that are in the new law, Act 157, which was just passed in March, are essentially granted to by the city to us. But there's always a caveat that anything that you put in there may be destroyed in the future should there be a need to expand that state highway. And that's always in the background.
Hello, my name is Paul Seitz. I'm a business development consultant with R&R Insurance Services in Waukesha, Wisconsin. Thank you for joining us today. This podcast is called Land Developers Focus. We will be exploring this ever-evolving complex process called land development. We will explore the approval process, the numerous government entities involved. To do this, we will meet with various Wisconsin-based land developers and discuss with them their experience of this fascinating business called land development. With me today is John Siepmann, Siepmann Realty Corporation, Waukesha, Wisconsin. Thank you for being with us, John.
Thanks, Paul.
I understand that Siepmann Realty Corp was started by your grandfather. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. My grandfather started the business in the 1940s, early 1940s with his brother. And as they progressed, my father joined the business and worked through high school and college, selling lots out of the back seat of his car, literally. He would actually get on the equipment, drive the scrapers and the bulldozers and get things ready as they started their development work.
Not too many developers are that hands-on today, are they?
And that's still to this day. We are out there in the field all the time. So he started up. Our father really took it off in the 60s, and with the codification of land and zoning in the state in the late 50s and early 60s, it opened up a door that provided a new way to develop land, and that was with planned unit developments. And that's what we've made our name on, is conservation developments, as we call them now, where we have generally smaller lots and large amounts of open space that are set aside for the community. And it's been a very successful run for us, and we enjoy developing that way, and we've got a good following of people, and we've got a good market. So now my brother has been in the business since the early 80s. I joined in early 90s, and now Jim's son Chris joined us 2 years ago, and he is going to follow in the footsteps of all of us.
I understand that you had an interesting experience with the Wisconsin Department of Transportation. They are given jurisdiction over all state highways, which certainly makes sense from a public good standpoint. And it involved a section of the Wisconsin Administrative Code, and it impacted one of your developments. Can you tell us about that experience?
Sure. It was considered at the time Trans 233 is the name of the state statute that we were following. And what happens is the state is given that jurisdiction, and their jurisdiction extended 100 feet into any property along a state right-of-way. And that effectively renders that property useless. So there's nothing we can do in there, whether it's a berm, a stormwater basin, a parking lot, a street, anything of that nature.
You can't even plant trees.
You can't plant anything. Grass is about all you can plant. So in that case, we were lucky that we were in an incorporated municipality where we were allowed to work with the municipality to deed the property to the city. The city then granted the subdivision an easement over that property to do what was required or what was needed.
And you were simply building a visual berm for the benefit of the lot owners?
Yes. The berm was to be built to break the visual between a state highway and this single-family development.
Seems like a long and winding road to get something done for the public good. And did you, let me ask you, were you compensated for that property that you gave the municipality?
Not at all. Not at all. So the property was given to the municipality, and all of the rights and everything in it that are in the new law, Act 157, which was just passed in March, are essentially granted by the city to us. But there's always a caveat that anything that you put in there may be destroyed in the future should there be a need to expand that state highway. And that's always in the background.
At the time, if I understand it correctly, the DOT didn't really have a process to address any request from any landowner to work within the 100-foot right-of-way. Is that true?
Well, they had a process, but it was a process of no.
But now we've resolved that, I understand, on a state level. You just alluded to Act 157.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit
So
about
the
that.
act allows a landowner, developer, whoever it may be, to develop in that 100-foot zone certain types of improvements. So it could be a stormwater pipe, it could be a sewer pipe, it could be a water pipe, or a parking lot, or a sign, a berm, anything of that nature. And as I mentioned, regardless of the time, whether it was before or after this law, there's still the ability for the state to come in and say, we need to remove those improvements or relocate them. And the expense of doing so would be borne by the landowners that have those improvements. So it's not perfect, but at least it gives us a window. And there's many times where there's a state highway that's not going to require expansion to that extent for a very long time, if ever. So it's highly unlikely in most cases that these things would be removed and the cost would be up to the landowners that had those improvements.
And if I understand, the Wisconsin Builders Association worked with the Department of Transportation to put Act 157 together, and I believe the governor signed it last week or 2 weeks ago.
That is correct, yes.
I mean, it's a good outcome. We'll see what the future holds for that. John, another area that land developers and home builders pay a lot of attention to are the fees that municipalities charge. And specifically, I think most people understand a building permit fee. There are other fees, connection fees for utilities, impact fees for the infrastructure needs of the new community. From a historical perspective, what have you experienced when it comes to these types of fees that these local municipalities place on people that don't even live there yet?
Well, it's been another long and winding road with respect to impact fees. And the prospect of an impact fee it was at one time far-reaching, where a community at one time could purchase a fire truck or police cars or build a new police headquarters or a new fire station. It was wide-ranging. The definition was wide open. And over time, that definition has narrowed. So now it's really strictly for capital improvements, not for anything with wheels. So no fire apparatus, no, you can't use it for certain things. But the bottom line is the latest legislation that was passed gives the communities the ability to assess these impact fees at the time of building permit. So it takes the burden off the developer to front those fees, which can be very expensive. And they're really, quite frankly, not needed until someone has built a house and has occupied it for several years before they really create the quote unquote impact on the community. Mm-hmm. So the legislation says that the community can hold these funds for 8 years. And at that point, if they have not spent them on what they had perceived as the impact at one time, that they have to return them to the original payee, whether it's the builder or the homeowner that was building on the property. That money has to be returned. That's not necessarily the case. And what we've experienced is that there's many communities that have taken these funds and they've put them into their general funds, and they are using them for paying down debt or offsetting debt service payments, which is not legal. And I think any attorney would look at that and say that is contrary to the law and that should not be occurring. And it's happening in more than one community and several here in southeastern Wisconsin.
There's an example in California of a building permit fee that was $24,000. And that homeowner took that case all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. It seems to be a means of generating revenue for municipalities that's really unbridled. In some states, you just alluded, we have some state laws that define how and for what reason these fees are charged. It seems as if in Wisconsin we have some attention being paid to these fees, and to a $24,000 fee, I think that's probably a pretty extreme example. But every small municipality really has a lot of latitude to impose these fees. And again, these are fees paid by people that are not voting members of that community. They typically don't live there yet. And so it's pretty easy, it seems to me, to implement them. I'd just like to move on. John, we have a regional planning commission in the metropolitan Milwaukee area known as Sewer PAC. What is their role, and have you had any experience with Sewer PAC?
We deal with Sewer PAC a lot, and whether they're in the background or in the foreground, they do a lot of things for our region. There's 9 regional planning commissions in Wisconsin, and Sewer PAC is the area roughly from the Illinois state line to Ozaukee, Washington County, and out to Jefferson County. And what they do is they're contracted by all of the units of government, whether it's a town, a village, or a city, to oversee the regional plans for these areas. Because a simple township or a small village or a small city doesn't have the ability to plan really too far beyond their borders. A town for sure, but a municipality, they can plan only for a short distance around them. And so it's necessary to have this quasi-government entity that is overseeing the region, because we have transportation and water clarity laws and needs that need to be met, and those are the 2 big things that they work on.
As primarily a developer of single-family lot subdivisions, they come into play, as I understand it, when it comes to the approval to connect the sewer system from the new lots to the existing one. And I understand that's a rather slow process, and Sewer PAC has the overall authority to approve or disapprove a sewer connection, which of course without, you can't move forward. What's been your experience with Sewer PAC?
Well, Sewer PAC is not a governmental authority. They do not have approval authority, but they do have very strong recommendations that go to the state. So if we're extending sewer to an area within a given sewer service area, they will recommend to the DNR that yes, this project gets our blessing, you can move forward with it. What we're getting, where we're getting friction is when we submit a proposal to do this, it's at a point where we've already gone through all of the municipal approvals. We've gone through all of the local and regional approvals. We've gotten our regulatory permits that we need for erosion control and whatever else we need. This is sort of the last step. And what happens is, if we get backed up at this point, we are always trying at this time of year in April to get a project started, because we want to be paving in September or October or even August if we can. Because the farther you push it back, the more problems you have with weather, and you might have to wait out a rainstorm and drying out your site to get it paved. And so when everything gets pushed back by a month or 6 weeks, it really puts us in a bind. And
you might actually lose a year in terms of, I don't think many people buy lots in January in Wisconsin, do they?
well, you'd be surprised. But what happens is then you get into a situation where you're racing before the frost comes to get your site stabilized. Mm-hmm. In everybody's interest, the regulator, the developer, the engineers, the overseeing engineers, and the inspection engineers are all trying to get this site to be green and stabilized as soon as possible. So the farther we get past September 15th, that's really the cutoff for planting grass in Wisconsin, mm-hmm. or in this part of Wisconsin. And if we go beyond that date for anything, we have to cover it up, and we have to tackify this with all sorts of chemicals and other things to hold that soil in place until the growing season in the spring. So it really puts us in a very challenging position, because we pave these roads, and generally speaking, then you have the utility company come and put the electric and gas and telephone and TV and whatever else in the ground. And so then there's another lag behind that. So it's really critical for us at this juncture, at the point where we've had all these approvals, to get this quickly, because it pushes the whole project back. Because the municipalities generally don't have in their sites the timing of your project. Some do, some understand it, but most really don't care about that until you get to the point where you start, or when you finish, really. And when you're paving in November and the ground is 33 degrees, there's a lot of communities that really don't want you to do that. And then you get strung out with extra expenses for guaranteeing those sites.
You're trying to keep a lot of people happy.
Yes.
John, in your opinion, what are the 2 or 3 greatest challenges for land developers in Wisconsin?
Well, that's a loaded question.
I know it is.
Probably the biggest issue right now is NIMBYs, which are not in my backyard folks, that typically are the people that have moved out to that area in 20 years. They've been there, and they moved into a new subdivision or maybe an old subdivision, and they bought that property to be out in the country, and they've always wanted the corn stubble or the wheat fields or whatever it might be in their backdrop. But they didn't own it, and now when it gets developed, it makes them very itchy, especially when they've lived on a stub street that isn't really a cul-de-sac but has a little bulb on the end of it that abuts the neighboring property. And when we extend off of those, it's in the right of the developer and the adjacent property owner to extend those streets. That's probably challenge number 1. Challenge number 2 is to try to keep the cost down, to keep the lot prices down. And if you look at today's home, the average price of a new construction in the last 5 years has gone from $550,000 in Waukesha County to well over $650,000 in a very short amount of time. And if you look at 25% of that cost of that $650,000 home, goes toward regulatory compliance. I would say 75% of that cost is on the development side, on the land development side, whether it's getting a wetland delineated or getting things shored up and stabilized for the winter for erosion control purposes, or our water quality studies that we have to do before we do a development. Those are all incorporated costs. So right now we're in a time where the easiest properties in the area have been developed, where it's just a flat open field with no wetlands or trees. Now we're into areas where we've got challenges with bedrock and groundwater and unstable soils and things like that just sort of add up to the cost of development.
Waukesha County is known to be a rather affluent county in the state. I think most people would agree with that. Do you see any initiatives relative to affordable housing in Waukesha County?
There's a lot of talk about it. Every community will say we would love to have affordable housing until it gets proposed. And when they see people come in, developers come in with lots that are 60 to 70 feet wide, all of a sudden the alarm bells go off. And it's really frustrating because that is what we need to do desperately. And if you look at any community, you look at any downtown community in southeastern Wisconsin or anywhere else, all of those cute homes that make up their main street are probably built on a 66-foot wide lot, and they're 15 feet or 10 feet from the neighbor's house. And people grew up there and loved the way they grew up, even though they could throw a stone into their neighbor's window, or they could have a conversation with their neighbor through the window. That's what we need. And that is affordable housing. And until we can shrink the lots down and shrink the houses down, we're never going to get there. And it's very challenging. The other side of things, we've got communities that say that we want this, and you get to the decision-making table and they say, we want this, but we'd like you to make this bigger or that longer or this street wider, or we want sidewalks everywhere.
And that all contributes to the cost. All the roads, utilities.
So right now, the lineal foot per foot cost of building roads and all of the improvements, we base it on a lineal foot standard. That has roughly doubled in the last 15 years. So you can see where this is going, that if these communities want larger lots, you're gonna, number one, they're gonna get a smaller tax density out of larger lots because you're gonna have fewer lots on larger parcels, so fewer taxpayers and tax revenue generators per acre than you would if you would consolidate that. So it's been proven, it's pretty easy math to see how this works out, that communities would do better revenue-wise if they would shrink things down.
Interesting.
The communities will often say, maybe not the communities, but the electeds and the appointed officials are highly likely that they will say something like, we don't want those people in our community, which is an indirect reference, of course, to anybody that's of low income. And the truth of the matter is that at the rate that we're paying for homes now at a new construction home, that affordability factor puts those people really out of the equation, unless there's a heavily subsidized area or tax credits given or something to incentivize that type of a buyer.
John, you're a past president of the Metropolitan Builders Association. And what role does the Metropolitan Builders Association play in the industry and communicating with all those government entities? Do you feel that it's a healthy role that they play? Do they foster good constructive communication?
I think they do, yeah. I've always considered the MBA as the voice of the industry, and that we speak for everybody, even if you're a homeowner. We have all sorts of programs. We've got the Parade of Homes that markets the builders and developers to the public. We've got a large government affairs group that takes on all of these challenges at the municipal level or the county level or the regulatory level, either regionally, regionally, or on a statewide basis. And it's a very powerful group, and we have a very powerful voice.
And I understand their consumer-based website has gotten a lot of attention, especially during the Parade of Homes, as you mentioned. John, thank you for your time today.
Thanks, Paul.
You are our maiden voyage, so to speak, with Land Developers Focus. We look forward to doing this with a number of other land developers. And again, I'm Paul Seitz with R&R Insurance Services in Waukesha, Wisconsin. Thank you for watching.